Well, I wanted to share a quote actually from another person that I admire greatly in this field, Donna Jackson Nakazawa. She's another big, great teacher in the field of ACEs. And she has this quote that is so beautiful. She says, even if have been set on high reactive mode for decades or a lifetime, we can still dial it down. We can respond to life's inevitable stresses more appropriately and shift away from an overactive inflammatory response. We can become neurobiologically resilient. We can turn bad epigenetics into good epigenetics, and we can rescue ourselves. So I think the one thing that I want everyone to know about ACEs is that 2/3 of Americans have ACEs if you look at all the data. So 70% of us are walking around having had some kind of ACE. So but 100% of us are resilient. So because resilience is not something you're born with, it's actually the ability to bounce back. So it's actually something that you can be taught. And so if we recognize it and we bring this into our awareness, then we can empower ourselves to actually become resilient. And so I think that's the take home message I want, because again, like I said, this is a pretty heavy topic, and I want people to understand that you can definitely bounce back, and you can definitely become resilient, and you can reverse generations of epigenetic trauma. I always say, you can be a change maker and a chain breaker. So I tell my girls that what we want to do, we want to just break the cycles of epigenetic trauma and things that we've been told, like this runs in your family, this is how it's going to be, this is how it's been for us. These kind of terms that don't apply anymore, because we can definitely forge a new path, neurobiologically and neuroplasticity and all of that, right?
How do our environment and experiences in childhood impact our health as adults? I am excited to bring you a conversation with my good friend Anu French about ACEs, also known as adverse childhood experiences, and how ACEs affect our health and how we can become resilient in the face of these challenges. Dr. Anu French is a holistic pediatrician, artist, and musician who is double board certified in pediatrics and integrative medicine and double fellowship trained in integrative psychiatry and integrative medicine through Dr. Andrew Weil's Center for Integrative Medicine. I am Dr. Andrew Wong, the co-host of this podcast and co-founder of Capital Integrative Health. This podcast is dedicated to transforming the consciousness around what it means to be healthy and understanding the root causes of both disease and wellness. For anyone who's curious about how their childhood may impact their health, this is a conversation you don't want to miss. Well, welcome, Anu, to the podcast. Great to have you on today, and so glad to have you here with us.
Thank you so much for having me, Andy.
So, been following you through your Facebook and Instagram, and it's been, I think maybe 8 years since we graduated together from fellowship. Time flies,
Yeah, 2014.
Yeah. Then great work. And I think for the audience, just in terms of, going through the Integrative Medicine Fellowship, and I know you've done some work with Integrative Psychiatry as well. You're a pediatrician. You do a lot of work with, academics, teaching. You've done such a big, a lot of amazing things. You're an artist, you're a musician. I would love to hear, I know the audience would love to hear your story of how you got into holistic health and integrative medicine.
Sure. I think our journeys of personal healing, I think we all have them, right? I know you have one too. And I think that brought many of us to the fellowship. And that's how I came there, because I was, I just had all these labels put on me by doctors. I was just feeling unwell, mind, body, spirit. My children were also, they were young at the time and just seemed to have all these little niggling chronic illnesses. And all we were doing were popping pills. And I think at that time, I just think there's got to be a different way to do this, and just really stumbled on a spam email from the Andrew Weil Center for Integrative Medicine. Well, at that time it was the Arizona Center for Integrative Medicine. And I said, oh, I should do this fellowship, not really thinking that I was going to practice it, honestly, but just that, I need to do something to get my health back on track. Endometriosis, chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, menstrual migraines. I mean, I can go on and on and on about all the, all these things these diseases that you suddenly start thinking you actually are, and, the fellowship just opened my world up to this whole nother global community of seekers and healers, and just started this whole path of, I guess it's empowering, right? To understand that there are other ways to do things, and learning how to integrate that into practice just sort of organically flowed into my practice, because I just started to say, hey, you want to try some probiotics? Oh, we should look at your vitamin D levels, and just small things. But people were like, wow, and then you bring in bags of supplements, and being able to actually look at things through an evidence-based filter, right? So exciting. Instead of saying, oh, I don't know what to do with that, So that's really how that happened, and just feeling that the whole concept of integration, really practicing what we preach, really understanding sort of the vulnerability of being sick and trying to heal, and understanding that it's on a day-to-day basis, right? It's on a moment-to-moment basis. I think it's just been a wonderful, wonderful journey.
Yeah. Thank you for that story. I was just thinking as you were speaking that this integration of mind, body, spirit that we call this integrative medicine in the West, right? But in fact, probably in a lot of cultures that this is already like understood,
Right. It's just good medicine.
It's just good medicine, right? Ayurvedic
Right.
medicine, traditional Chinese medicine. We look at sort of a lot of healing traditions in general. There's, we know that the mind and the body and the spirit are connected. And I think this brings us to our topic today, which is a really, really important topic for all of us, whether at any age that, listening to this, we all were children at one point, right? And you're a pediatrician, and love to hear your thoughts on this idea of, of adverse childhood experiences, or what are called ACEs, now. And I think first let's just talk about, ACEs, and what is your concept or definition of ACEs? Why is it so important? And you can kind of get into some of those areas as well.
Sure. And I think, I've talked a lot on this topic, and I always like to sort of put a little disclaimer when we start, because a lot of the terms we're going to use and the topics we're going to talk about are triggering for a lot of people.
Good
and
point.
When you start bringing up the concept of an adverse childhood experience affecting your health and your health outcomes, a lot of people start getting anxious. And I love to quote Dr. Nadine Burke Harris. She's the pediatrician who really did that 2014 TED Talk, which I highly recommend everybody watches, which changed the trajectory of my professional life. And she talks about how we need to move from what's wrong with you to what happened to you. And so, we're going to go through some pretty heavy topics in the next few minutes, but I also want to make sure that we end in a place of hope, because knowledge is empowering and freeing, and we are all neurobiologically resilient. But I just always like to start with that, because even when I talk about this, it sort of brings up my own trauma, and we don't want to re-traumatize.
I wonder if we should, for ourselves and also for our listeners, get into the body for 30 to 60 seconds. Would you mind doing some?
I think that's a great
meditation.
idea.
Maybe we'll put our hands on our heart.
Sure. Yeah.
What do you normally do?
I like the body scan. The body scan.
Let's do that.
You want to do that several times a day, because
awesome.
I'm always in my head. So how do we drop into the body? So let's just find a comfortable position. If you're seated, if you're lying down, it doesn't matter where you are right now listening to this, just get into a comfortable position. If you're seated, I like to feel my feet in my shoes or on the ground, just the soles flat. And then just bring my awareness to my ankles, and then my knees and my legs, and the seat of my body in the seat of the chair. And then bring that awareness all the way back up to my shoulders and my neck and my jaw, which is kind of where I hold all my attention. Take a breath in and a breath out. And then feel your attention go down your arms to your fingers, and then all the way down your body to your toes. And let's wiggle our fingers and toes. So just really dropping into our body, and then bring that all the way back up the back of the body, the spine, to the top of the head. And then just kind of feel the release of tension in the mouth and the jaw, just taking another deep breath in and letting it all go. And then just feeling ourselves, real gratitude for this body and all the functions in it that we sort of take for granted. And then opening our eyes. Just love dropping into the body. Feels so good.
Thank you so much. Can we do that for another half an hour? That would need that.
Yeah, it's so good to just do it through the day, because
Yeah.
some of us are seated a lot, right? And I just like to just even wiggling one's hands and fingers and toes, I just feel like immediately brings me back to body. And I just, I lost my father recently to a very chronic, debilitating neurological disease.
Sorry to hear that. Yeah.
And one thing that he couldn't do towards the end was he couldn't take a deep breath, he couldn't cough, and he couldn't clear his throat. And I've just become like so grateful for those simple things. Like when I do this, I do, or just, like, I'm like, wow, like these are things we just take for granted.
Yeah. Yeah.
And now I don't think I ever will again after watching him suffer like that and just realizing how much those matter, to our day to day. So I think, I just wanted to, honor him for that moment, like just the gratitude for everything he taught me and what a great person and role model he has been in my life. So, but I was just thinking like, like the body scan is so powerful because it just reminds us of how important our bodies are, how much they do.
Body scan is great. It really brings us back to kind of who we are in the present moment, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Our fingers and hands are tingling and we're doing this. Yeah.
So you were asking what ACEs stand for. So we, defined it as adverse childhood experience or events, but it's really these traumatic events and situations that happen during childhood where physical and emotional needs are not met. And, they kind of came out of that landmark study in 1995 to 1997, where Dr. Fility and Dr. Anda, they did it on 17,500 people, and they asked them these questions about 10 specific area of ACEs, and they started to see how that was, connected to health outcomes and health diseases. So that's really what an ACE, that's the definition of an ACE, an adverse childhood event or an adverse childhood experience.
And it seems like, because the first thing that came to mind when you think about ACEs often is abuse, and there's different kinds of abuse, but it sounds like there's other areas of ACEs, not just abuse. So I believe there's these 10 areas that we want to
absolutely cover. And the 10 areas that were studied in the original study were physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, physical neglect, emotional neglect, parental mental health or suicide, mental illness or suicide, parental incarceration, parental substance use or abuse, domestic violence, especially violence against the mother that's witnessed, and then parental divorce or separation. So those were the 10 areas that were included in the questionnaire, the original question.
I mean, what is it? Over 50% of households are divorced, right? So that one category alone is
right. And that's kind of what started me on my journey, because I got divorced in 2011, and my children came home from school. They were in this group called Kids in the Middle, and they were given this thing about ACEs, and I'm like, I'm a pediatrician, I don't know what this is. And I was reading it, and it said if a child is an ACE score of 1, and we can talk about that a little bit, but 1, if they have a children of divorce, their risk for stroke is twice as an adult. So I was like, okay, we got to do something. And so building intergenerational resilience has sort of become everything I do, really, both personally and professionally. But I do want to touch on modern day ACEs, because I think our circumstances have also thrown out all of these other things like social isolation, peer rejection and bullying, poverty and homelessness, community violence. I mean, these are starting to be included now as also ACEs. And I think one thing that a point I want to make is that the findings that Dr. Fility from the original study showed that different types of adversity that they were examined were equal in their damage.
Wow.
So that's really important, because I think society views something as sexual abuse as to be a lot worse than maybe like, parental incarceration. But in the original study, it didn't matter. The perception of damage that was done was the same regardless of the ACE. And so I think that's very, very important when we view these, this toxic stress and this as a biomedical problem.
Anu, are you saying that all of these different 10 ACEs and the other ones that you mentioned, homelessness, social isolation, bullying, these more recent phenomenon, or at least more recently recognized phenomenon, end up sort of triggering or maybe activating the same biological pathways.
Exactly, right.
Okay.
When we talk about how ACEs actually affect the body and mind and spirit, the damage that's done by them is sort of equivalent
Okay.
across
Okay.
the board, right?
Yeah. I'd love to. I don't know if you want to get into the deep neurobio part of this. You know this probably better
Sure.
than.
Yeah. I mean, I think that there's different ways that the ACEs affect the body, right? So um, we know that they impact developing brains and bodies, right? Because they're happening in childhood. And so the data shows that they affect structure and function. And so they actually affect the size of parts of brains. These children who've gone through ACEs, their brains, like the amygdala, which is, the center for fear, the hippocampus, which is the center for memory and emotion, and the prefrontal cortex, which is for ADHD, for executive functioning and impulse control. All of these are smaller,
Okay.
On actual MRIs. We also know that the stress response is affected. So, what happens is it sort of resets your ability to respond to stress, right?
Yeah.
And so we go from that sort of adaptive life-saving stress response to a maladaptive pro-inflammatory stress response. And so it affects everything in the body. It affects our hormones, it affects our immune system, it affects how epigenetically our DNA is read and expressed. So it's really kind of profound, how much the trauma in childhood actually affects really every physiological, biological, genetic expressive function in our body. So, when we talk about ACEs and, how it affects, disease states, it also affects sort of people talk about how, it's a social problem, like a public healthcare problem, right? Because these things lead to homelessness and poverty and incarceration and things. And we talk about these being choices, right? But actually, when you start thinking about how your body is affected by trauma, these aren't necessarily, conscious choices.
Yeah.
I think it's really
especially
important.
as a child,
Yeah,
experiencing before the brain is fully developed,
yes,
before the age of 25, really,
absolutely,
right?
right.
So then there's that differentiation between trauma that happens as an adult, which is also damaging, but then even probably more as a child that with that developing brain, that's a bit more malleable, that's a bit more, susceptible to these kind of stressors.
And then we have intergenerational trauma, right? So,
right.
we've talked about this before, but we know that, I mean, we know that if a child, if a woman if she has an ACE score of more than 3, then her 3-year-old child has a much higher chance of having developmental issues and being hyperactive and physically aggressive. And if a mother has, an ACE score of more than 3, then, we see that they have more issues postnatally in that first year after having a baby. So, I mean, we see how that, and then we have children whose children's ACE scores actually impact their learning. So these landmark studies that came out in pediatrics recently, 80% chance of having trouble with learning math and having lower literacy skills if they have ACEs. And so just really, I think it's important that just educating, educators and clinical practitioners out there about how, we can't really have this false separation of the social history and the medical history, because I think it's all one history, because it impacts not just physical disease in the body, but affects, how children perform. Also, right?
I mean, just that concept of intergenerational trauma, that the mothers or grandmothers trauma or ACEs for them when they were little can affect someone now. That's
absolutely
mind-boggling.
Yeah.
So
just building resilience along generations becomes really important.
So we talk about scoring ACEs and things like that.
Right.
Is it possible to overcome those early childhood events?
Absolutely. And, I think it's important, again, as I was sort of that disclaimer. I mean, I remember the first time I heard an ACE talk, I was like, okay, I need to go get this questionnaire off the CDC and find out what my ACE score is, right? Because that's what everybody's sort of thinking when you're listening to this. Okay, what is my ACE score? And, and I think it's important to know that when you have, higher ACE scores, it does increase your risk for chronic disease, so if you're kind of wanting to look at those kinds of things, yes, it triples the risk for this, it doubles the risk for this, it does decrease life expectancy and so on. But I always like to sort of, and then we've all these experiences in childhood that can also increase your risk for depression and chronic fatigue syndrome and autoimmune disease and things like that. But once you know about it, it raises your awareness. And so I always advise people, okay, if you're going to do your ACE score, then we also need to talk a lot about, okay, what are you going to do about it, right? Because how are you going to offset it? And the good news is that there's lots of things you can do that builds resilience, which reverses the effects of ACEs.
Okay.
And that's fantastic, because that's I think really important for people to know. Is like, I'm a grown adult, I'm already a fully formed person. And I'm going in and I'm finding I have this ACE score. What do I do next? Like, what do I do? So I think it's important to know that there are two pieces to this. One is like not to avoid re-traumatization, and then to build resilience. And so creating trauma-informed communities, creating trauma-informed offices, like our office, we really, really work a lot on that, is creating safe spaces for communication, how the cues of safety start with how we, approach anybody, for that example, not just a patient, but anybody that we're talking to, permission to stop and feel uncomfortable and speak up, therapeutic listening, like active listening, right? Motivational interviewing, and, just understanding that, how you interview somebody and how you get their ACE score is also important. So questionnaires that are built in a way that are not just, again, bringing up all the old
right,
traumas.
not triggering.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then also moving immediately into intergenerational resilience. So building resilience for the caregiver and for the child, because, one of the most important things that's come out of ACE research is that if a child has one consistent, loving adult figure, it really offsets all the trauma, and so it doesn't have to be a parent.
Right.
It can be a grandparent, it can be a coach, it can be a teacher, it can be a mentor, but having that one person who's consistently there in a safe space can reverse everything. So that's just, to me, that's hugely powerful. But how do we build resilience, right? So, I mean, some of these things seem like they're sort of, well, of course I know how to, I mean, this is sort of straightforward, but the research about, mindfulness practices, whether they be, moving meditation or seated meditation or moving practices like walking or yoga, these things, just huge data showing that, you have an increase in the gray matter in those areas we just talked about that shrink. They actually increase, your gray matter actually expands when you do these processes.
So it's reversible. The damage from the trauma is reversible with practices of resilience, essentially.
Yes, absolutely. And that's, to me, that's mind blowing, because I remember learning in medical school that our brains and spinal cords are static, right? Now with the new concept of neuroplasticity, where we know that we can actually rewire and refire and, like build these new pathways. It's so empowering to know that. And then, they've actually done PET scans that show when you do yoga, it decreases blood flow to the amygdala, which is the kind of the alarm center, and increases blood flow to the frontal lobe and the prefrontal cortex, which is, where we need for executive function. And also increases GABA, which just makes you feel better, right? So I think we know that doing mindfulness practices can actually increase, again, optimize the structure and function of your brain and your immune system and your, your hormone system and all of them. Yeah.
So I think, Anna, what you're saying is that our brains are kind of like chia pets, right? We can use meditation for the miracle grow, on there.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's good. And then, I mean, the other thing that's also really exciting is that when you do trauma-informed cognitive behavioral therapy, or EMDR, or neurofeedback, things that are, trauma-informed or trauma sensitive, what happens is, we talked about how, trauma impacts how our DNA expresses itself, right? So, we talk about telomeres, which are the little shoelaces, right, at the end of our DNA, and these little sort of straggly, and the length of the telomere sort of determines the length of your life. right? And so we have these studies showing that children who are born of adversity kind of come out with shortened telomeres. So anything that we can do to decrease DNA strand breakage and improve. And again, that's these studies showing that if you do trauma-informed CBT and EMDR and these things like that, you find that you can reverse the DNA strand breakage. And then what's really exciting is that a year after the therapy stopped, you still see sustained improvement. So again, I think I always kind of want to talk about how building resilience through mindfulness and mindful movement, and through music, through art, through building things, so robotics, cooking, I always say Jenga blocks, simple things. Yeah, just where you're actually doing something in a three-dimensional space, spatial orientation, where you're actually building things. And then community connection, of course, like where you're doing things in community. All of these things can really be powerful ways to build resilience.
And the community, like you said, just touched on there. I mean, that's so huge. Do you feel like there's a difference between, say, meditating alone versus meditating in a group setting or a community setting?
Yeah, I guess it depends on the person and the situation. Like, I think of some of the children I see in my office who are bullied and who are traumatized by peer groups. I think they would not be somebody I would recommend to go to a group therapy session. Like, I would be teaching them how to find a sense of, of mindfulness and a sense of center within themselves first. And so more safe spaces. Whereas, there are definitely lots of studies for, circles of sound healing and circles of group therapy, especially for teenagers who might be facing diseases that are rare or chronic, or kind of isolate them. Then finding groups that have children with similar diseases or similar challenges can be really, really powerful, because then they know they're not alone, and then that they have people that they can relate to. So I guess it really depends on the situation.
So the medicine, the community, the medicine resilience can be personalized to that individual and their experience.
Absolutely, yeah.
What about sleep? How important is sleep with regards to, ACEs recovering from trauma?
Oh, so important. And, I think the other thing that it sort of brings us back to is that one thing that the ACEs does is that it pushes us into this fright, flight, freeze, appease sort of situation, because our hypothalamus pituitary axis and sort of our neuroendocrine immune axes are just all put on alert. And, we talk about, the lion and the bear, like that, we were supposed to be in the forest somewhere, and then we were supposed to be ready for that. But then I remember Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris saying, what if that bear comes home every night? What if the lion comes over? And I thought, so powerful, right? So put in that situation all the time. And so how do we move from that sympathetic overload to parasympathetic, right? Going from the, fright, flight to the rest, digest, and so I think that's where restful sleep, being able to actually fall asleep and not having to force yourself to go to sleep. And also understand that we do so much of our detoxing and our resting at night, when we're sleeping. So yes, building, going into a place where our vagal nerve gets to rest, I think is really, really important piece of moving from those situations and those places of being so on alert all the time to calming down and resting. Yeah, very important to decrease inflammation and to decrease the risk of chronic disease, for sure.
And we know that food is medicine. We talk a lot about this in integrative medicine. And obviously there's what we eat, but there's also probably, how we eat. And I'm wondering your thoughts about and your feelings about how food activates that I guess that vagus nerves, system and the emotions and everything.
Right.
What do you recommend for nutrition or how to eat?
Absolutely. And I mean, I love those studies on mindful eating, right? I'll have to find the reference, but I just remember reading about where, we had children who were, put into two groups, and one group was given whatever they wanted to eat, but they were taught to eat mindfully. Then we had another group who were given healthy food, but there were all these distractions. And the group that was eating mindfully, even though they weren't necessarily always eating healthy food, was still, more healthier. The outcomes were healthier. So I think mindful eating is so difficult these days, right? I mean, all of us seem to, we eat on the go, we eat in front of screens. So I just trying to, again, this is talking about building intergenerational resilience within families. So I think sitting at the table together and eating a meal without any distractions and paying attention to what we're eating, giving gratitude for what we're eating, and teaching children where your food comes from, like this food chain, right from nature, the elements to the farmers, to the people, bringing the food to the grocery store, to whoever bought the food, whoever prepared the food, just bringing their awareness to that, I think is huge. And then being able to smell and look at the colors of the food, and doing mindfulness practices around mindful eating. And then also just I think teaching children how to connect their feelings and emotions to how they feel with different foods, and smells taking you back to different memories. So I think mindful eating is important. And then intermittent fasting, I think, is so important in building resilience. And it seems weird, like, how does that connect? But intermittent fasting allows you to rest your digestive system. And so again, it helps your vagal nerve's health. And when you help your vagal nerve controls your breath, it controls, your blood pressure, it controls your stress response, it controls everything. And so allowing it to rest and recover at night so that it's ready the next morning for whatever stress you're going to face, I think really is helpful. So resting and not eating. We weren't designed to eat 24 hours of the day, but now we have food 24 hours of the day, and we're awake 24 hours of the day.
Yeah.
And so we're munching all the time, and we're eating all the time, and we're eating mindlessly in front of screens. So I think bringing that sort of discipline into one's life of trying to eat within a specific number of hours and not eat within a specific number of hours, I think that can be very helpful in building resilience.
What do you tend to recommend for people that are looking at intermittent fasting in terms of number of hours?
Yeah, I think the first thing is just to sort of maybe start with 12 hours, because, I think 12 hours is doable.
Yeah.
Eating from, 8 to 8 or 7 to 7, or 9 to 9, something like that, which is easier for people. And then slowly moving to the 8-16, and I always, it's always the thing to check with your doctor first, right? Because there's some situations where fasting may not be healthy.
Right, absolutely.
And certain constitutions,
certainly people with eating disorders, we would say.
And yeah, we want to be careful. But I think just bringing that sort of that education to families that, resting the belly, resting your digestive system is so important in building resilience of the whole.
So we have different practices that rest or balance the mind and the spirit, and then certainly we need practices like fasting at times that would rest the body.
Absolutely.
And sleep, and so we're kind of giving ourselves a break in a way, letting that vagus nerve regenerate.
Yeah. And then, getting out into nature, that's the other thing, of course, right? So, I mean, it's so nice to have the summertime right now to be able to get out and be in around the trees and, near bodies of water, and, just, again, being able to unplug, right, from Wi-Fi and from electronics.
I actually know one person that went to the park for a whole year and hugged trees for a whole year and got rid of her chronic fatigue. I mean, she was in her early 20s.
That's fantastic.
Yeah. It's like connecting with nature,
Yeah, I love that story. I mean, tree hugging, such a beautiful thing to teach our children.
Right. More than just a cliche. Like the trees are actually giving us, the earth is giving us energy.
Absolutely. And I live in a neighborhood with these 200-year-old oak trees. I mean, these giant oak trees that are just fantastic. And I remember when one of them died in our front yard, and my girls were little, and we looked out the window and we cried when we saw it being cut. It was being cut down by the local thing. And then we asked them to leave the little stump, so we painted it and made it like a little. My kids would have tea parties on it. But saying goodbye to these trees, just understanding that they're truly living creatures, and they're giving us so much, that we're connected.
Were they able to climb on them? Did they have like low branches enough to climb on the oak trees in the neighborhood? Or?
No, not the ones we have here. These are like really
huge. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. But when they had to cut it down, I think it really affected us all, because we realize how much we've gotten attached to the
Yeah,
screen
yeah.
of
I
our
think we definitely all need trees. I know you're into. I believe you're into yoga as well.
Yeah, and I
To
always
some
joke
degree.
about this because I've been doing yoga for a long time, but I'm terrible at it. And when I walk into a classroom, there's that innate bias. Oh, she's from India. She must be really good at yoga, right? And I
Yeah, yeah.
can't, I am so I go because I know that yoga brings a flexibility to my thoughts and my
Mm-hmm.
process. My body is still struggling to find that flexibility, but it's okay. I still keep going back. But
Yeah,
I was
yeah.
very lucky to be invited to do, like, we did a review, a review on yoga in children, and it was included, like, the AAP actually came out with a clinical mind body statement in
Amazing.
2016, which is radical, right?
Yeah.
And they did a review, and I was Dr. Larry Rosen was one of my mentors that asked me to co-author this review, and it really talks about how important yoga is as far as just a therapeutic tool in building resilience and treating so many chronic diseases in
So
children.
we can look at yoga as another possible way to deal with or build resilience for ACEs, or
Yeah, and there's so many classes that do both parent and child, like
nice.
mini classes,
Yeah.
lots of places give, and there's this sort of family friendly yoga, just so
Mm-hmm.
that
Mm-hmm.
sometimes people are intimidated by yoga. And I always tell people I'm so bad at it and I still go back to it. And you can always just go and enjoy the experience of it, because it's just
Mm-hmm.
doing it as a family again, doing it together.
Well, Anna, we'll definitely have to take a yoga class. So one time, I guarantee you, I'm not as flexible as you are. So that's.
No, I guarantee you
I'm,
I'm not as flexible as you.
I'm not sure that my poses would even be called yoga poses, but anyway, they're an approximation. But it's all about just doing our best, and just being in the moment, being with what is. And I feel like yoga is super helpful for me personally. I've just seen that to be super helpful for a lot of people. So getting back in
Absolutely,
the
yeah.
body, kind of like we did in the beginning with body scan. What are the other good kind of movement, mindful movements that you would recommend for this? Because it does sound like it's about getting into the body,
Yeah,
back
I
to the
mean, I
body.
love walking meditations. Again, I
Yeah.
think that I'm not a great seated meditator. My mind is just always very busy, and so I find it so easy to be present in the moment if I'm moving. And one thing we used to do with my children when they were younger is just, we'd all walk around the house together, and we'd all hold a word in our minds, and then we'd sit down and talk about the word, and it just takes a few minutes. Um, to do that, and it was really fun. They start off with little things like words like ice cream and lollipop, and at times then it got a little bit more, a little deeper after that. But I think walking as a family, walking meditations, walking outside is great, because you have to sort of be present in the moment, right? To
Yeah.
kind of know where you are, you need to know where your body is in space and
Mm-hmm.
time. So I love walking meditations, and I think medical qigong
Mm-hmm.
great. Another one, and then chair yoga that is in chairs for people who who have accessibility mobility issues. So just trying to make these mindful movement options accessible.
Right.
And now we
Right.
have so much, I mean, here with so many people doing outdoor yoga in the park, which is fantastic, because you're getting kind of benefit of being outdoors and also
Yeah.
doing yoga and qigong outdoors.
What about I guess for kids and adults, some kinetic therapies, massage, acupuncture, body work?
Yeah, and I think again, I will talk a little bit more at the end about the Integrate network that I'm part of. But I
Okay.
think
Okay.
looking for trauma informed, I think is really important. I think when you're talking about somebody touching
Yeah.
your
Okay.
body, and especially touching children's bodies, it's really
Mm-hmm.
important with chiropractic care, massage, manual
Mm-hmm.
medicine of any kind,
Mm-hmm.
acupuncture,
Mm-hmm.
definitely. I think it's important that we have someone who understands that some of these kids might have already been traumatized through touch, and so
Mm-hmm.
we're
Mm-hmm.
using touch, we need to do it in a respectful way and in a way that's definitely cognizant of that. But definitely a lot of good therapeutic modalities, craniosacral therapy, Reiki, right?
Yeah.
Energy, therapeutic touch, really, really gentle ways of, getting the energy flowing through children again. And then also massage, definitely. Very another thing I always like to mention is, like, sort of using animals. So pet therapy
Pet
and
therapy.
therapeutic
Yes.
horsemanship has become a big,
Mm-hmm.
horses have become a huge
Yeah.
Sort of way of children to connect with animals and then connect with themselves. So I think those are also important modalities that one can use. Absolutely. Yeah. And recommend.
Any herbs that you have found to be helpful, herbal therapy, plant medicine, anything of that nature?
Yeah, I think that I do like magnesium in an Epsom salt soak. I always
That's
tell
the best.
anybody, yeah, anybody can do that, and children love being in a tub. They just
Yeah.
love playing in water, and so it's such an easy way to sort of get kids to sort of detox and calm down. So I love magnesium is one
Kids
of
and adults. Kids and
and
adults.
adults, right? Yeah. and
Yeah.
and and bath time is another great opportunity to build intergenerational resilience, because everybody's sort of having fun together,
Yeah.
and everybody's present in the moment, and water is such a great way to do that. And there's all kinds of fun stuff you can do in the tub now with all those those coloring things and things like that.
Nice. Yeah.
But I think that's one thing I like. And then as far as herbal and plant medicine, I do like theanine, L-theanine, which
L-theanine.
is an amino acid from green tea. So it's very safe, and it's available in chewable and powder forms for kids. And that's one thing that I use quite a bit in my practice for the anxious, agitated, unfocused child. So I do love theanine.
Yeah, great.
I use that quite a bit. Yeah.
What is one thing you wish everyone knew about ACEs?
ACEs, yeah. Well, I wanted to share a quote actually from another person that I admire greatly in this field, Donna Jackson Nakazawa. She's another great teacher in the field of ACEs. And she has this quote that is so beautiful. She says, even if have been set on high reactive mode for decades or a lifetime, we can still dial it down. We can respond to life's inevitable stresses more appropriately and shift away from an overactive inflammatory response. We can become neurobiologically resilient. We can turn bad epigenetics into good epigenetics, and we can rescue ourselves. So I think the one thing that I want everyone to know about ACEs is that 2/3 of Americans have ACEs if you look at all the data. So 70% of us are walking around having had some kind of ACE, but 100% of us are resilient, so because resilience is not something you're born with, it's actually the ability to bounce back. So it's actually something that you can be taught, and so if we recognize it and we bring this into our awareness, then we can empower ourselves to actually become resilient. And so I think that's the take-home message I want, because, again, like I said, this is a pretty heavy topic, and I want people to understand that, you can definitely bounce back, and you can definitely become resilient, and you can reverse generations of epigenetic trauma. I always say, you can be a change maker and a chain breaker. So I tell my girls that what we want to do, we want to just break the cycles of epigenetic trauma and things that we've been told, like this runs in your family, this is how it's going to be, this is how it's been for us. These kind of terms that don't apply anymore, because we can definitely forge a new path, neurobiologically and neuroplasticity and all of that, right?
That's so awesome. That's so amazing. That's such a hopeful message. And just to paraphrase Gandhi for another famous person is, to see the change, we have to be the change, right? That's
absolutely.
And just to throw a little functional medicine in there, we know that in functional medicine, they always talk about how, your genes are not your destiny. But as you were speaking here, I was just kind of feeling in my heart, I was like, oh, well, traumatic experiences are not your destiny either. So there's ways we can really cultivate that resilience that's acquired throughout life, that we're not born with, but we acquire through the life wisdom experience, things like that.
Absolutely. Yeah. And reaching out for help and connecting with people, and, creating teams around us that can help us be trauma informed, both at work and also within the family. Absolutely.
Anu, when should people see a therapist, a mental health professional with
ACEs?
I
mean, I think that it's, if you're going to do your ACE score, and you're going to, find that you have a high ACE score, and you're starting to get anxious and worried about this, I think seeking out a trauma-informed therapist is important. And obviously, I mean, in our office, the first thing is we want to keep the kids safe. And so if we find that the kids are in active situations of ACEs, we definitely want to.
That's always a big consideration. And then, of course, your beautiful background. We have to look at the walls of your. This is really your artwork, I believe.
This is my home office
behind you.
So to speak. Yeah.
How do you feel about art and music music and sound healing, which I know you do that yourself,
Yeah.
writing, you're an
Oh.
author. How is that related to, cultivating resilience?
Oh, so important. And I think, I mean, I always say that all of these things saved my life, because I 10 years ago, I was just sick. I was sick in mind, body, spirit. And, you start these things that was doing for a long time, sound healing and art and so on, sound, chanting and singing and drawing and coloring. You start looking at the research, and there's hundreds of studies that show how art decreases your cortisol, how sound actually induces a positive immune response. You actually see cytokine change from anti-inflammatory to pro-inflammatory to anti-inflammatory over time. And so I think that I always say we can all be sound healers for ourselves. We can all be sound therapists for ourselves. Like, it doesn't take that much to hum or tone in the shower. It doesn't take that much to listen even passively if you don't want to actively. But within any culture, any religion, any belief system, there are ways to chant repetitively and go from a place of dissonance to resonance, and really come into alignment and vibrational alignment. So, I mean, I think for me, sound healing, that's was teaching my children about this, and that's how the music sort of came. The music that I've put out there is all based on personal experience.
Yeah, music and chanting and singing, or listening to music, even listening to sound healing, it really helps the cells from a deep cellular level get into a resonance, like you said.
Absolutely.
There's a sound healer that we were taught in our fellowship at Trish Devney in Tucson. So I was talking with her on one of our webinars that we did. I think you were on our webinar as well. And she was talking about how she overcame viral hepatitis in France through sound healing, because at that time, in that era, they didn't have like the interferons or whatever.
Right.
So, I mean, she was like, I'm going to become a sound healer. And then a year later, the doctors checked her titers and stuff, and they were like, there's no hepatitis. And it was just amazing. Like, just what you had said about resonating, with the cells and like increasing or decreasing different cytokines, through sound.
Right. I mean,
really
there are like over 60 studies showing, the positive psychoneuroimmunological effect of music. I mean, there's tons of studies showing how, it really can really help, that the immunological, pathways, become more positive, the stress response, decrease the stress response, and drumming circles are the other thing that can be really powerful, for mental health, physical health, everything. Absolutely. I wanted to give a shout out to a wonderful grassroots organization that I'm part of called Integrate. And this was started several years ago by Julianne Johnson. It was basically to connect people in the trauma-informed world. And now Julianne Johnson and Victoria Manuela, they've taken it to a national level, and it's doing wonderfully. And it's basically creating resources that are trauma-informed on a virtual platform. So the one that's coming up, we have a wonderful conference coming up, which is where you sign up, and it's a sliding scale, so it's very affordable. And over 3 months, you'll get every week you'll get an email with practitioners sharing their way of regulating their nervous systems, sort of sharing their secrets, so to speak. And I've talked a lot about the neuroscience of mantra on that, and sound healing and chanting, and how it really helped me. But it's a wonderful organization to get involved in. Also, if you'd like to join, they have a Facebook page, and then they have a website with trauma-informed resources on it. So I really wanted to give a shout out for that, because that has been a real wonderful resource for me locally. It used to be just the trauma-informed network of St. Louis, and now it's become integrated, and it's on a national level, and they're doing wonderful. And they're doing a Reiki workshop that's coming for grief processing, and then they do like accessible yoga for accessible yoga for all kinds of bodies. And then we had just done one on how to parent your inner child to become a better parent and things like that. So I just wanted to make sure that's I just brought attention to the great work that they're doing, and I'm very grateful to be part of it.
Thank you, Anu. What a wonderful organization. So it's Integrate. Is there a website or?
Yeah, it's called Let's Integrate. So if you search it on Facebook or Google it pops right up, and it's the Trauma-Informed Network. Yeah. And if you go to anufrench.com, under advocacy, all the wonderful organizations that I've been really honored to partner with are on there under advocacy on my website too. Yeah, and gives you direct links to all of them. Yeah.
Well, Anu, thank you so much for coming on today. We really appreciate this amazing discussion about a really important topic, ACEs, and then how to become or cultivate resilience so that we can overcome. What is one thing that you've done personally, if you don't mind? That's our closing question for you. That has changed your health for the better.
Yeah, I think personally for me, art.
Yeah.
So making sure that I do a little bit of affirmative art every day. To remind myself, that I am, I am strong, I am. And, and I think, for me, it's like, building healthier communities through healthier kids, right? That's kind of sort of the motto of everything that I put out there. And, I do encourage people to join me. My website is anufrench.com, and it's a new wellness. And I have a newsletter that you can sign up for. And then there's a whole integrative medicine cabinet on there that has lots of resources from all our mentors and people that we admire. I just kind of gathered everything and put it in one place. And I think that if you go on the website, you'll see how art has really been a huge part of my life. I call it craftivism. So you take the art to the next level where, I've partnered with many companies where, creating all these beautiful things, but all the proceeds go back to global literacy or human rights, so women's rights. And so that way, I'm creating art for my own health, and then I'm putting it out there so that it uplifts other people. And
That's
then also,
amazing.
yeah, so I think art for me is the most important thing. Yeah, that's really kept me going, changed my life, and then it's kept me going on it. And then again, creating messy art with your children, another great way to build intergenerational resilience.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. So go to anufrench.com and you have a new wellness newsletter on there. You have art. I know you have these beautiful t-shirts. I definitely want to get one for.
Yeah, there's all kinds of accessories and apparel and stationery. And it's just really fun to be creative and keep designing these things. And then there's also, I also have presence on Facebook and Instagram also, if people want to follow. I just to share.
What is your handle on
Instagram? It's anewwellness.anufrench. And then on Facebook, it's A New Wellness by Dr. Anu French. Yeah.
Got it. And I think it's right, if you're watching on YouTube here, after the fact, this is definitely on the background here. I see your poster right behind you. So you can check that out too on the video. But thank you so much, Anu, for coming on. Great to see you here and connect here. And
thank you so much for having me.
It's been
fantastic talking to you and on a topic that's really close to my heart. And I hope we've left everybody with, in a place of empowerment and hope.
Yes.
And positivity that we can reverse ACEs and build resilience.
Yes. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for taking the time to listen to us today. If you enjoyed this conversation, please take a moment to leave us a review. It helps our podcast to reach more listeners. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss our next episodes and conversations. And thank you so much again for being with us.